You know, Lydia was asking what you do. I was almost too embarrassed to say. My wife? Oh, she's just a secretary. God, Rosemary, all that education, and you're fetching coffee and answering phones for some middle manager. It's pathetic. Rosemary freezes, her back to him. He doesn't see the flash of steel in her eyes. He has no idea that the simple job, the company she works for, and the very chair he's sitting on, all belong to her. His world is about to shatter, and the woman he mocks is the one holding the hammer. Gregory Harris believed his life was a testament to his own brilliance. He lived in a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, wore hand-stitched Italian suits, and drove a car that cost more than most people's homes. He was a senior vice president at Meridian Capital, a notoriously aggressive private equity firm. And he had, in his opinion, the perfect wife, Rosemary. Rosemary was quiet, beautiful, and most importantly, uncomplicated. When they met 2 years ago, she was working as a university librarian, a job he found charmingly quaint. They married in a whirlwind romance. He saw her as the perfect accessory, intelligent enough to host a dinner party, but gentle-tempered enough to never challenge his authority. Then, 6 months ago, Rosemary's father passed away. Gregory had offered his token condolences. He'd met the man, Walter Dawson, only twice. He knew Walter was in business, but he'd always assumed it was some small, old-money consulting firm. He never bothered to ask the details. He was far too busy with his own ascendant career. After the funeral, Rosemary had changed. She quit the library. Gregory assumed she was grieving, perhaps looking for a hobby job. When she told him she'd taken a position as an executive assistant at a company called Nexus Solutions, he'd laughed out loud. An assistant, he'd said, sipping his 25-year-old scotch. Honey, you don't need to work. And if you must, why not something respectable? Charity board? Art gallery? I want this, Greg, she'd said, her voice quiet. I need to feel productive. Gregory shrugged. Fine. If you want to play at being a working girl, go ahead. Just don't be late for the Bainbridge dinner on Friday. It's important for my career. What Gregory didn't know was that Nexus Solutions was not just a company. It was a mid-level tech subsidiary, one of 17 different companies held under a massive, private, multi-billion-dollar holding corporation, Vanguard Enterprises. And Walter Dawson hadn't just been in business, he had been the founder, architect, and sole owner of Vanguard. Rosemary Harris, his quiet, simple wife, had inherited all of it. For 6 months, Rosemary had lived a double life. By day she was Rose Dawson, using her maiden name, the new, efficient but overlooked assistant to a mid-level director at Nexus. She learned the systems, she listened in the break room, she saw the company from the ground up, just as her father had always advised. By night, she was Rosemary Harris, the secretary wife, enduring her husband's casual, creeping disdain. She'd done it, initially, as a test. The timing of her father's death, so close to her marriage, had unsettled her. She needed to know if Greg loved her, or the potential of the wealth he didn't even know she had. She needed to understand her father's legacy before she could lead it. But the test had begun to yield horrifying results. The man she married was transforming, or perhaps revealing himself. With every win at his own firm, his arrogance ballooned. His mockery of her little job became a daily ritual. "How was your day, honey?" he'd ask, not looking up from his phone. "Did you collate the reports? Use the right staples? God, the incompetence of the support staff at my office is staggering. No offense." "None taken," Rose would murmur, stirring the pasta. "It's just a different breed of person, you know," he'd muse, pouring himself a drink. "People like me, we build. We're predators. People like your boss. And well, you just maintain. You're the support structure. Necessary, I suppose, but not exactly inspiring. Tonight was worse. It was the anniversary of her father's death, a fact Greg had conveniently forgotten. He was too elated, buzzing from a new project at Meridian. "This is it, Rose," he announced, throwing his briefcase onto the Italian leather sofa. "Project Titan. This is the one that gets me the partnership. We're acquiring a mid-cap tech firm, over-leveraged, poorly managed. We're going to buy it for parts, streamline the redundancies, and sell the IP for a 300% profit. It's brutal, and it's beautiful." Rose felt a familiar chill. "Streamline the redundancies? What does that mean, Greg?" "It means," he said, walking over and patting her on the head like a dog, "we fire the dead weight, the assistants, the middle managers, the receptionists, the people who are just there, like your little job." He kissed her forehead, oblivious to the fact that she was shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, clarifying rage. "What's the company?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Oh, some little outfit. You wouldn't have heard of it," he said, walking to the bar. "It's called Nexus Solutions." Rose's grip on the wooden spoon tightened until her knuckles were white. He wasn't just insulting her job. He was actively planning to destroy it. He was planning to streamline her. And he was bragging about it to the one person who could stop him dead in his tracks. "You're right," Rosemary said, her voice a whisper. "I'm sure I haven't." He laughed, turning his back to her. "Exactly. Now, where's my dinner? I've got a conference call with Lydia in an hour. We're planning the first phase of the takeover." Rosemary watched him, the man she had promised to love. The test was over. The results were in, and Gregory Harris had just failed in the most spectacular way possible. The next morning, the elevator at Nexus Solutions felt different. The air, usually filled with stale coffee and N8 AM gloom, now felt charged with impending doom. As Rose Dawson, she entered the bullpen she shared with 4 other assistants. Her friend, Brenda, a single mother who had worked at Nexus for 15 years, was already at her desk, rubbing her temples. "Morning, Rose," Brenda sighed, not looking up from her screen. "The new coffee in the break room tastes like burnt mud. And guess what? Rumors are flying." Rose sat down, her heart heavy. "What kind of rumors?" "The big kind. The M&A kind," Brenda said, lowering her voice. "My boss, Mr. Henderson, was in a closed-door meeting all yesterday afternoon with corporate. He came out looking like he'd seen a ghost. The word is, some private equity shark is circling, and you know what that means." Rose knew exactly what it meant. It meant Gregory. It meant streamlining. "It means they're going to clean house, honey," Brenda continued, her voice trembling slightly. 15 years I've been here. My boy, his medical bills. If I lose this job..." Rose put her hand on Brenda's arm. "Hey, don't spiral. They're just rumors. You're the most efficient person in this entire department. They'd be insane to let you go." "That's sweet, Rose. But efficiency isn't what these people care about. They care about bottom lines. We're just numbers on a spreadsheet to them." "We're not just numbers," Rose thought, a fierce, protective fire lighting in her chest. "You are not a number, Brenda." For the rest of the day, Rose watched. She did her job with flawless precision, scheduling meetings, formatting reports, and fetching coffee. But she was also listening. She heard the hushed, terrified whispers by the water cooler. She saw the nervous glances managers gave each other in the hallways. She felt the palpable fear of good, hard-working people who were about to have their lives ruined by her husband's ambition. That evening, Greg came home even later than usual. He was electric, a manic energy rolling off him. "We're in!" he crowed. Not even saying hello, he ripped off his tie and threw it on the floor. We sent the preliminary offer to the parent company. They've accepted for review. They're dinosaurs, this parent company. Some old-world behemoth called Vanguard Enterprises. Their board is archaic, but they control the asset, so we have to play their game. Rose was plating his now lukewarm dinner. Vanguard? I've heard of them. Aren't they notoriously private? Exactly. No one even knows who the new owner is. The founder, Walter Dawson, died 6 months ago, and apparently left it all to, get this, his daughter. Greg let out a bark of laughter. Some poor girl who probably doesn't know a stock from a bond. She's probably already handed the keys over to the board. That's what we're counting on. A fractured, leaderless company, ripe for the picking. Rose placed the plate in front of him, her hand perfectly steady. You assume the daughter is incompetent. I assume, Greg said, taking a huge bite, that she's not me. She's not a killer. This is a man's world, Rose, especially this part of it. Project Titan is moving. Phase 1 is due diligence. Lydia and I are heading the team. We're going to go into Nexus and find every single redundancy to justify the leveraged buyout. You're going into the building? Rose's voice was faint. Yep, not me, personally, at first. We send in the auditors. But I will be meeting with the Vanguard board. I have to convince them to sell. The current offer is just a feeler. The real meeting, that's where I'll close. I'll charm that old board and the phantom daughter if she even bothers to show up, and I'll have them eating out of my hand. Rose looked at the man she once loved. He was so consumed by his own reflection, he couldn't see the reality inches from his face. He was hunting a ghost, all while mocking the phantom. To her face, every single night. Greg, Rose said, testing him. What about the people? Like, the assistants, the people who've been there for years. What happens to them? Greg sighed, annoyed by the interruption to his victory speech. Rose, you're so naive. That's why you're, well, you. It's a business, a machine. You have to replace the old rusty cogs. You can't get sentimental about it. It's just cost. They'll get a severance. They'll be fine. Now, can we stop talking about your work? Let's talk about mine. Rose simply nodded, clearing his empty plate. Of course, Greg. Tell me more about Project Titan. She listened for 2 more hours. She listened as he detailed his strategy. She listened as he bragged about his colleague, Lydia. She's a killer, just like me. A real shark, not soft, like you. And as she listened, Rosemary, the quiet wife, faded away. In her place, Ms. Dawson, the chairwoman of Vanguard Enterprises, was taking notes. She wasn't just going to stop the deal. She was going to dismantle the man who had so casually decided to destroy the lives of her employees, all while sleeping in her bed. The game was on. The pressure at Nexus Solutions became unbearable. Greg's auditors arrived, a team of stone-faced young men and women from Meridian Capital who set up in a conference room and began demanding files, performance reviews, and efficiency reports. Panic swept the floor. Brenda was a nervous wreck. They asked for my last 3 performance reviews, she whispered to Rose during a frantic coffee run. And they wanted to know my secondary and tertiary functions. What does that even mean? I'm a secretary, not a multitasking robot. It means they're looking for reasons to make your role redundant, Rose said grimly, handing Brenda a cup. I can't lose this job, Rose. I really can't. Rose's heart ached for her friend. That night, she made a decision. Her double life was no longer just about her and Greg. It was about Brenda and the hundreds of other employees at Nexus. She couldn't act as the chairwoman yet. That would show her hand too early. But Rose Dawson, the efficient assistant, could still do some digging. She accidentally delivered the wrong stack of files to the auditor's conference room. While they were distracted, she caught a glimpse of their internal project whiteboard. It was a list of names, department heads, managers, and under the admin heading, she saw it. Brenda K., redundant. Severance package B. Bile rose in her throat. They had already decided. When she got home, the penthouse was empty. Greg wasn't back. This was becoming common. His late nights for Project Titan now stretched past midnight. A knot of a new, colder suspicion was forming in Rose's stomach. It wasn't just his arrogance. It was the way he mentioned his colleague. Lydia. Lydia thinks. Lydia and I closed. Lydia is a killer, just like me. Rose walked into their shared home office. Greg's laptop was on the desk, humming softly. He, in his supreme arrogance, had never bothered to password protect it from her. He thought her too simple to even know how to use it. She sat down. Her hands were shaking. This felt like a violation. But then she remembered Brenda's name on that whiteboard. He had violated his vows of marriage, and his company was violating its duty to its people. She opened his email. It didn't take long. His inbox was filled with threads about Project Titan. But there was one folder, simply labeled L. She clicked it. The emails were not just professional. They started months ago. Casual, then flirty, then explicit. They weren't just colleagues. They were lovers. Rose scrolled, her vision blurring with tears of pure, unadulterated fury. She saw emails discussing the takeover, but they were intertwined with their personal plans. From Lydia Vance. To Gregory Harris. Subject, RE, Titan projections. And after we gut Nexus, we can use the bonus to finally take that trip to Monaco. Just the two of us. I can't wait to have you all to myself, away from her. Does she still like her little secretary job? It's so pathetically funny. Rose felt the air leave her lungs. Pathetically funny. She scrolled further. She found hotel receipts, listed as client entertainment. She found dinner reservations for two at places Greg had claimed he was taking the team. And then she found the most recent one. From Gregory Harris. To Lydia Vance. Subject, the final push. Just one more hurdle, L, the Vanguard meeting. I've got to sell the deal to their ancient board. That old fossil, Robert Coleman, is the gatekeeper. Once I get past him, and the mysterious heiress signs off, we're home free. Nexus is ours. The partnership is mine. And I'm finally free. I'm tired of playing the dutiful husband to a simpleton. A simpleton. Rose closed the laptop. The quiet clicking sound was like a gunshot in the silent apartment. The hurt was deep, a physical ache in her chest. But it was being rapidly replaced by something else. Something cold and hard as diamond. She had been a fool. She had been testing a marriage that was already a lie. He wasn't just arrogant. He was unfaithful. He wasn't just ambitious. He was cruel. He and Lydia Vance were planning to liquidate her father's legacy, fire her employees, and use the profits to run away together, all while mocking her. Rosemary Harris, the heartbroken wife, walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. When she looked up, it was Ms. Rosemary Dawson in the mirror. A simpleton, she whispered to her reflection. An old fossil. A mysterious heiress. She straightened her shoulders. All right, Greg, she said, her voice devoid of all its former softness. You want to meet the heiress. You'll get your meeting. You want to impress the board? You'd better be ready. You want to get past Mr. Coleman? He's the least of your problems." She left the penthouse. She didn't pack a bag. She simply walked out. She took a taxi to the Vanguard corporate suite at the Regis Hotel, a place she had kept on permanent retainer. She opened her secure laptop, the one Greg didn't know existed. She made one phone call. "Robert?" she said. A warm, older voice answered. "Ms. Dawson, I was wondering when you'd call. He's made his move, Robert. Meridian Capital, Gregory Harris. I've seen the offer. It's insulting." "It's more than that," Rose said, looking out the hotel window at the city. "It's personal. They've scheduled the meeting with you, correct? Next Tuesday. Mr. Harris and a Ms. Lydia Vance." "Good," Rose said. "I want you to be as difficult as possible. Ask him about the human cost. Ask him about the long-term plan. Let him dig his own grave." "And the final board presentation?" Robert asked. "That," Rose said, a thin, dangerous smile playing on her lips, "is when I'll be formally introducing myself. Please make sure the main boardroom at the Tower is prepared. I want to see their faces." Robert Coleman was the COO of Vanguard Enterprises and had been Walter Dawson's best friend for 40 years. He was a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 60s, with a mind like a steel trap and a deep-seated loyalty to Walter's legacy and to Walter's daughter. He regarded Project Titan as a hostile invasion and Gregory Harris as a particularly loathsome insect. Greg and Lydia, however, walked into the Vanguard preliminary meeting room with the swagger of conquerors. They saw Robert Coleman, with his grey hair and conservatively tailored suit, and dismissed him instantly. Old fossil. "Mr. Coleman," Greg said, shaking his hand with a little too much force. "Gregory Harris, Meridian. This is my colleague, Lydia Vance. We're thrilled to finally put a face to the name." "Likewise," Robert said, his face impassive. He did not smile. "Please sit. I have reviewed your preliminary offer for Nexus Solutions." "It's a strong offer, Robert." "May I call you Robert?" Greg said, leaning forward. "Very strong. We're offering 30% above market value. It's a quick, clean, all-cash deal. You offload an underperforming asset, and we take it off your hands. Everyone wins." Lydia chimed in, her voice smooth as silk. "What Gregory means, Robert, is that we see potential in Nexus that is currently untapped. We believe with our management we can unlock significant value." Robert steepled his fingers. "Unlock value." A popular phrase. In my experience, it's often a euphemism for liquidation and mass layoffs. Your proposal is rather thin on your plans for the existing staff. Nexus employs over 800 people. Greg and Lydia shared a quick, amused glance. "He's a sentimentalist." "Robert," Greg said, adopting a patronizing tone, "you've been in this business a long time. You know that to make an omelette, you have to break a few eggs. Synergy requires streamlining. It's just simple math. The staffing overhead at Nexus is bloated. We'd be cutting that fat, yes, but the result would be a healthier, more profitable entity." "And the fat?" Robert asked, his eyes never leaving Greg's. "What about someone like Brenda Kosloff in administration? 15 years with the company. Single mother, 2 children, one with significant medical needs. Is she fat, Mr. Harris?" Greg was taken aback. He didn't expect the COO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation to know an assistant's name. I'm not familiar with individual assistants," Greg stammered, regaining his composure. "But our models are impartial. They identify redundancies. If Brenda is redundant, then she will be handled respectfully. A severance. Package B, I believe." "Package B," Robert repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. 4 weeks' pay for 15 years of loyalty. How generous. Lydia, seeing Greg falter, jumped in. Mr. Coleman, with respect, Meridian Capital is not a charity. We are a business. We are offering Vanguard a significant immediate cash injection. Surely the personal details of a few secretaries are not relevant to a deal of this magnitude. Robert Coleman let the silence stretch. He looked from Lydia's cold, ambitious face to Greg's arrogant one. He knew, from Rose, exactly who these two were. He knew they were lovers. He knew they were planning to gut this company and toast their victory in Monaco. "On the contrary, Miss Vance," Robert said finally. "At Vanguard Enterprises, the personal details are the only thing relevant. My predecessor, Mr. Dawson, built this company on a single principle, that our people are the asset, not fat, not overhead, not redundancies. It seems you and Meridian Capital have a fundamentally different philosophy." Greg felt a prickle of sweat on his neck. This wasn't going as planned. The old fossil had teeth. "Robert, let's be frank," Greg tried, shifting to a man-to-man tone. "This is a big payday for Vanguard. Don't let sentimentality get in the way of a 9-figure deal. We just need board approval. We just need the owner's signature. We're prepared to present our full proposal to the board and to Ms. Dawson at your convenience." Robert stood up, a clear dismissal. "The chairwoman is, as you noted, very private. She does not waste her time. She has, however, agreed to be present for your final presentation. 1 week from today, 10 a.m., the main boardroom at Vanguard Tower." Greg and Lydia stood, a little stunned. "That's it?" Lydia asked. "That's it," Robert said. "Your proposal, as it stands, is lacking. You are selling profit, but you haven't demonstrated value. You have 1 week, Mr. Harris, to fix that. The chairwoman is not sentimental, but she is, shall we say, meticulous. She detests fat even more than you do, but she is very, very particular about how she defines it." Robert smiled, a thin, chilling expression. "I will see you both next week. Do try to be prepared." Greg and Lydia walked out of the office, their confidence rattled. "What the hell was that?" Lydia hissed in the elevator. "He's a dinosaur, Greg." "He's a dinosaur with the owner's ear," Greg snapped back. "He's trying to guard his precious little kingdom. He named a secretary. Who does that?" "He's just posturing," Lydia said, straightening her jacket. "He's trying to scare us into upping the offer." "It doesn't matter. He said the heiress will be there. She's the one we have to convince. She's the one who wants the easy money. She won't care about some Brenda." "You're right," Greg said, his confidence returning. "He's a gatekeeper, and we just got the key. 1 week. We'll polish the pitch, flatter the heiress, and this will be over." That night, Greg went home to the dark, empty penthouse. He was annoyed. Rose wasn't there. For the last 2 days, she'd been absent. He'd found a note on the fridge. "Greg, staying with my mother for a few days. Feeling overwhelmed. Need space." "Unbelievable," Greg muttered, crumpling the note. "She picks now to be overwhelmed. Her one job is to support me. Project Titan is on the line, and she runs off to her mother's. So, pathetic. Just like a simple secretary." He poured himself a large scotch, dialed Lydia's number, and got to work. He never once considered that the overwhelmed wife and the meticulous heiress were one and the same. The lobby of Vanguard Tower was designed to intimidate. It was a 3-story atrium of glass, steel, and stark white marble. The silence was absolute, broken only by the quiet echo of expensive shoes. Gregory Harris and Lydia Vance, despite their designer clothes and inflated egos, felt small. They were in their power uniforms, Greg in a navy power suit with a blood-red tie, Lydia in a severe black sheath dress. They had rehearsed their presentation for 72 hours straight. They had models, charts, and projections. They were ready for war. "This is it," Greg muttered to Lydia, adjusting his cuffs. 45th floor, the main boardroom. "Just stick to the script," Lydia said, her voice tight. "We flatter the board. We focus on the profit. We marginalize the human cost, just like we planned. And we charm the pants off the heiress. We'll be out of here by noon with a yes." A silent security guard motioned them to a private elevator. The ride up was silent. Greg's heart was pounding. This was the biggest deal of his life. The partnership, Monaco, the new life with Lydia. It was all behind this one door. The elevator doors opened onto the 45th floor. It was even more austere than the lobby. The walls were panelled in dark, rich mahogany, and the floor was covered in a rug so thick it absorbed all sound. Robert Coleman was waiting for them. "Mr. Harris, Miss Vance." "Welcome," Robert said, his face unreadable. "The board is ready for you." He led them down a short hallway and pushed open 2 massive, 10-foot-tall wooden doors, revealing the boardroom. It was a cavern. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a staggering 180-degree view of the entire city. A colossal, polished black granite table dominated the room, surrounded by 20 high-backed leather chairs. Most of those chairs were already full. Seated around the table was the Vanguard Board of Directors. It was not the collection of old fossils Greg had anticipated. There were sharp-looking men and women in their 40s, a distinguished older gentleman who Greg recognized as a former state senator, and a tech billionaire he'd only seen on magazine covers. They all stopped their quiet conversations and turned, in unison, to look at the newcomers. Greg felt his practiced smile freeze. This was not a fractured, leaderless company. This was a fortress. "You may set up at the end of the table," Robert said, gesturing. Greg and Lydia walked the long, green mile to the presentation area, their footsteps loud in the heavy silence. They plugged in their laptop, their hands fumbling slightly. "Good morning," Greg began, his voice sounding thin. "I am Gregory Harris, and this is Lydia Vance. We're here on behalf of Meridian Capital to discuss the incredible, synergistic opportunity of acquiring Nexus Solutions." The board members just watched. No one smiled. No one nodded. Greg cleared his throat and launched into the pitch. He talked about market inefficiencies. He talked about leveraging IP. He talked about cost-saving measures and immediate ROI. He and Lydia performed their script perfectly, a slick, rehearsed duet of corporate jargon. After 20 minutes, Greg paused for breath. "And that," he said, with a flourish, "is why we believe our offer is not just generous, but the right move for Vanguard's future." A long, excruciating silence followed. Finally, the former senator spoke. "Your cost-saving measures, Mr. Harris, they involve a 40% reduction in staff, correct?" "A 40% realignment, sir," Lydia corrected smoothly, "to bring the company to peak operational efficiency." "I see," the senator said, and made a note. "And you have no plans to invest in the Nexus infrastructure?" the tech billionaire asked. "Your plan seems to be a simple strip and sell of their existing patents." "We believe the patents are the core asset," Greg said. "The infrastructure is secondary." The air in the room was cold. Greg was failing. He could feel it. He'd misread the room entirely. These people weren't dinosaurs. They were sharks, and they smelled blood. He needed an ally. He needed the heiress. "Excuse me," Greg said, trying a different tack. "Mr. Coleman, you had mentioned that the chairwoman, Ms. Dawson, would be present. We'd love to address her directly, if she's here." Robert Coleman, who had been standing quietly by the door, nodded. "You are correct, Mr. Harris. The chairwoman has been here for your entire presentation." Greg and Lydia looked around, confused. They scanned the faces again. They were all board members they recognized. Where was she? I'm sorry, I don't see," Greg began. "Ah," Robert said. "That is because she was delayed in traffic. She just arrived." Greg felt a wave of relief. A new face. A fresh start. This was his chance. "She asked me to begin without her, but to pause for her arrival," Robert continued. "She has been personally reviewing the Nexus asset for the last 6 months. She has very strong opinions on this deal." The massive boardroom doors at the far end of the hall opened with a quiet click. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert Coleman said, his voice ringing with a new, profound authority. "May I present the majority stakeholder and chairwoman of the board of Vanguard Enterprises, Ms. Rosemary Dawson." Greg and Lydia turned, broad, fake smiles plastered on their faces, ready to charm the simple heiress. A woman stepped into the room. The first thing Greg noticed was the sound of her heels on the granite floor. Click, click, click. It was a sharp, confident, commanding sound. She wasn't an old woman. She wasn't a flustered girl. She was wearing a bespoke, midnight blue Armani Privé suit that fit her like a glove. Her hair, which he was used to seeing in a simple, soft ponytail, was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. Her face, which he was used to seeing look up at him with gentle deference, was set in a mask of cold, powerful indifference. It was his wife. Greg's smile didn't just fade, it shattered. His mouth fell open. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pale white. He made a small gasping sound, like a fish pulled from water. Lydia, who had only seen pictures of Rosemary, didn't recognize her. She just saw a powerful woman. She nudged Greg. "Greg, that's her. Pull it together." But Greg couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. Rosemary didn't look at him. She didn't look at Lydia. She walked with terrifying, unhurried poise to the empty chair at the absolute head of the table. She sat, and the entire board turned to her. She placed her leather-bound portfolio on the table. She opened it. She looked up and finally, her eyes swept over Greg and Lydia. Greg's entire world tilted on its axis. The woman he mocked, the simpleton, the secretary. She was staring at him from the head of a multi-billion-dollar boardroom, and she was not smiling. The silence in the boardroom was no longer just heavy, it was suffocating. Lydia Vance, sensing the catastrophic shift in Greg's demeanor, stared in confusion. "Greg, what is it? What's wrong?" Greg's hands were shaking so violently, he knocked over his glass of water. It spread across the polished table like a dark, growing stain. He just stared, his eyes wide with a dawning, unimaginable horror. "Rose," he whispered. The name was a dry croak. "Rose. Honey. What is this? Is this a joke? Are you taking notes for Mr. Coleman?" The board members all turned to look at Greg, their expressions ranging from pity to pure contempt. Rosemary let his pathetic question hang in the air. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time in 6 months. She saw a weak, terrified man, hollowed out by his own greed. She leaned forward, her voice calm, clear, and cutting. It was a voice he had never heard. It didn't ask. It commanded. "Mr. Harris," she said. The formal address hit him like a physical slap. "I am not your honey," Rosemary continued, her voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "I am not taking notes, and I am not just a secretary. My name is Rosemary Dawson, and you are in my boardroom, at my table, attempting to sell me a plan to dismember my company." Lydia Vance's perfectly made-up face went completely white. She looked at Greg, then at Rosemary, then back at Greg. The simpleton wife? This was the wife? The heiress? The owner? "Oh, my God," Lydia breathed, stumbling back a step. "I believe you two know each other," Robert Coleman said dryly from the doorway. "Rosemary, please," Greg stammered, his mind blue-screening, desperately trying to compute. "I don't understand. You work at Nexus. You're an assistant. I—" "Yes, I am," Rose said. "For 6 months, I have been Rose Dawson, executive assistant. I've been fetching coffee. I've been scheduling meetings. I've been logging your auditor's requests. I've been listening in the break room. And I've been listening at home." She turned her icy gaze on Lydia, who looked like she was about to be physically ill. "Miss Vance, a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I've read so much of your work." Lydia's blood ran cold. "I've read your synergy proposals," Rose continued, tapping a thick binder in front of her. "Your plan to streamline the dead weight. People like Brenda Kosloff, an employee I've had the pleasure of working with. A woman who you, in your impartial model, deemed redundant. You plan to fire her with 4 weeks' pay. A woman who has given this company 15 years of her life." "Ms. Dawson, that's just a projection." Lydia fumbled, her slick professionalism evaporating. "And I've read your other correspondence," Rose said, her voice dropping, and now it was personal. Greg visibly flinched. "Oh no." Rose met Lydia's terrified eyes. "Your plans for Monaco. Your opinion of my pathetically funny little job. Your impatience with having to wait for me. Her to be out of the picture." Lydia Vance, the killer, the shark, looked at Greg in pure panic. He had promised her the wife was a non-entity. The non-entity was now sitting at the head of the table, holding the strings to their entire lives. "And you," Rose said, her attention finally snapping back to her husband. Greg looked like a man about to face a firing squad. "You, the predator, the builder, the man who was tired of playing dutiful husband to a simpleton." Every word was a nail in his coffin. "Rose, no, listen to me," Greg begged, taking a step forward. "You don't understand. I knew you were special. I was testing you." The sheer, pathetic desperation of the lie made even the board members wince. Rose held up a single elegant hand. "Silence. Mr. Harris, your Project Titan is dead. Meridian Capital's offer is not just rejected. It is an insult to my father's legacy and to every employee at this company. You are done here." No. "Rosemary, please." Greg was crying now, his face crumpled and ugly. "Our marriage, I love you, Rose." "You loved the idea of me," Rose said, her voice filled with a sudden, weary finality. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical precision. "You loved a prop, a quiet, uncomplicated accessory who ironed your shirts and wouldn't challenge your fragile ego. You didn't love me. You didn't even know me." She stood up. The entire board stood with her. "You mocked my work. You planned to destroy the livelihoods of hundreds of people. You betrayed me in my home. And you did it all with my money." Greg's head snapped up. What? "The penthouse, Greg," Rose said, walking around the table toward him. He cowered as she approached. "Did you think you could afford that on a VP's salary? My father bought that apartment in cash as a wedding gift. It is a Vanguard corporate property. The car you drive, it's leased by my holding company. The club you belong to, my father was a founding member. The entire life you thought you built, it was mine. You were just living in it. Greg's legs gave out. He literally staggered, catching himself on the back of a chair. He had built nothing. He was nothing. He was the support staff he so despised. "You are not a predator, Greg," Rose said, stopping a foot from him. "You're a parasite." She looked past him, to Lydia, who was frozen by the door. "Miss Vance, I believe your own company, Meridian Capital, has a rather strict morals clause in its executive contracts. I imagine they also frown on inappropriate relations that jeopardize 9-figure deals. Mr. Coleman has already forwarded your emails, your hotel receipts, and the minutes of this meeting to your CEO, Mr. Powell. I doubt you'll have a job by the time you get back to your office." Lydia let out a choked sob, grabbed her portfolio, and fled the room. Now it was just Greg, alone, humiliated, destroyed. "Rosemary, what do I do?" he whimpered. Rose looked at him, not with hatred, but with a profound, empty indifference. "Security will escort you from the building, Mr. Harris," she said, turning her back on him. "My lawyer will be in touch. He will be serving you divorce papers at the apartment. You have 24 hours to collect your personal belongings, which I imagine won't take very long." She walked toward the door, where Robert Coleman was holding it open for her. "Rose, please, don't do this," Greg screamed, a raw, desperate sound. Rose paused in the doorway, but she didn't turn around. "It's already done. You just didn't know it. You were right about one thing, Greg. It is pathetic that you were married to the owner of the company and were too arrogant to ever see it." She walked out. The two massive doors swung shut with a quiet, final thud, leaving Gregory Harris alone in the silent, cavernous room, his entire world gone. The world was muffled, as if Gregory Harris were underwater. The sound of the massive boardroom doors clicking shut behind him was the last clear thing he heard. After that, it was a blur. 2 security guards, built like refrigerators and dressed in the same severe, dark suits as the Vanguard board, appeared at his side. They didn't touch him, not at first. They simply flanked him, their presence a silent, undeniable force, guiding him back toward the elevator. He moved, but his legs felt like they belonged to someone else. He saw the mahogany walls, the thick carpet, the silent ride down in the glass elevator, but it was like watching a movie of his own life. He was a ghost. The city spread out below him as the elevator descended, a glittering prize he could no longer touch. He stumbled out into the 3-story marble lobby. The sunlight was painfully bright. He was on the sidewalk before he even realized his feet were moving. The sounds of the city rushed in, car horns, a distant siren, the chatter of people walking by. They were all so alive. And he was finished. His phone began to vibrate in his pocket. It buzzed, a frantic, angry insect. He fumbled for it, his hand still shaking. The screen read, "CEO. Powell," he answered, a desperate, last-ditch hope flickering. Maybe he could spin this. Maybe he could explain. "Sir, please listen." "Harris." The voice on the other end was a roar, so loud it distorted the speaker. "What in the hell did you do? I just got a call from Robert Coleman at Vanguard. The deal is dead. He said it was rejected with extreme prejudice. And I just got a package from their legal department. Emails, Harris, hotel receipts. You were sleeping with Vance? You were sleeping with your colleague on a hostile takeover bid." "Sir, it's not what it looks like," Greg babbled, pacing frantically on the sidewalk, people swerving to avoid him. "It's exactly what it looks like. You were insulting the owner? The owner was your wife? Are you clinically insane?" Powell screamed. "You didn't just jeopardize a 9-figure deal. You humiliated this firm. You made us look like amateurs. You're fired, Greg. You're finished. Our lawyers will be in touch about the non-compete, and you can guarantee we will be clawing back every cent of your last bonus. You are a pariah, Harris. You'll never work in this city again." The line clicked dead. Greg stared at the phone. Fired. Finished. Pariah. He tried Lydia. His hands were trembling so badly he misdialed twice. On the third try, it connected. A cold, automated voice answered. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." Of course, she was a killer, a shark. She'd cut her losses and run, just as he would have done. Their alliance, built on shared greed and betrayal, had shattered the moment it was no longer profitable. A cold fear, sharper than the autumn wind, cut through his shock. Money. He pulled out his wallet, his corporate Amex, his corporate Visa. He ran to the corner ATM, jamming the Amex in. Card invalid. "Please contact your issuer." He tried the Visa. Card declined. They hadn't waited. Meridian had already frozen his accounts. He was standing on a street corner in a $5,000 suit, with maybe $80 in cash in his pocket. The penthouse. He couldn't think. He just had to get home. Home to Rose. He could fix this. He could apologize. He could beg. He was good at selling. He could sell this. He flagged a taxi, his arm waving wildly. He gave the address, his voice cracking. The driver eyed him in the rearview mirror, this wild-eyed man in a power suit. He arrived at the gleaming tower, his home. He ran through the revolving doors, into the lobby that smelled of faint gardenias and old money. Frank, the doorman who had greeted him with a fawning, "Good afternoon, Mr. Harris, for 2 years," stepped in front of him, his face a mask of professional regret. "Sir, I'm afraid I can't let you up." "Frank, what are you talking about? It's me," Greg yelled, his voice echoing in the quiet lobby. "I live here. Get out of my way." "I'm sorry, sir," Frank said, his voice firm. "My instructions are very clear. You are no longer on the resident list. We've been asked to deny you entry." You can't do this. My things are up there. My clothes. My life." "A building manager is packing your personal effects as we speak," Frank said, reciting a line he had clearly been fed. "They will be delivered to a secure storage facility. Your lawyer, or a representative, can arrange for their retrieval." His lawyer. He didn't have a lawyer. Meridian's lawyers were coming for him. "Please, Frank," Greg whispered, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a vast, cold emptiness. "Just let me go up. Just for a minute." Frank shook his head, his eyes full of something Greg had never seen from him. Pity. "I can't, sir. I'll lose my job. They're very serious." Greg backed away, stumbling out the revolving doors. He stood on the curb, looking at the taxi he hadn't paid. The driver was already yelling at him. He threw his last $80 through the window and sank onto a granite bench across the street. He stared up at the wall of windows, at the 34th floor penthouse. His penthouse. No. Her penthouse. It had always been hers. The car, his beautiful midnight blue sports car, was gone from its reserved spot out front. Of course, leased by Vanguard. He had built nothing. He was nothing. He had been a pet, living in a gilded cage, and he'd been too arrogant to even see the bars. He looked down at the watch on his wrist. A Patek Philippe, a congratulations on the wedding gift. From his simpleton wife. It felt suddenly heavy, hot, like a manacle. With a raw scream that was half sob, half rage, he unclasped it and threw it with all his might into the street. It skittered across the asphalt and disappeared down a storm drain. Weeks later, the atmosphere at Nexus Solutions was electric. Rosemary Dawson, now Ms. Dawson, to all, had called an all-hands meeting in the company cafeteria. The room was packed, people lining the walls, the air thick with nervous anticipation. She stepped onto the small stage, dressed not in the intimidating armor of the boardroom, but in simple, professional trousers and a silk blouse. She looked like Rose, but she also looked like the leader they had never known they had. "Good morning, everyone," she said. Her voice, unamplified, carried through the hushed room. "I know the last few weeks have been stressful. You've all been living under the shadow of a takeover. Rumors, auditors, fear. I'm here to tell you that the threat is over. Vanguard is not selling Nexus solutions." A wave of stunned silence was broken by a single person clapping, then another. Then the entire room erupted in applause, cheers and open, relieved sobs. Rosemary held up a hand, smiling warmly. "But more than that," she continued, "I'm here to apologize. My father, Walter Dawson, built Vanguard on a single principle, that our people are the asset. Somewhere along the way, our corporate leadership, I lost sight of that. I've spent the last 6 months working alongside you. I've fetched your coffee, I've collated your reports, and I've seen your talent, your dedication, and your fear. That ends today." She looked out and found a face in the crowd. "Brenda Kosloff, would you please come up here?" Brenda, who was standing near the back, looked around, thinking she'd misheard. People gently pushed her forward. She walked up to the stage, her hands shaking, her face pale. "Brenda is one of the most dedicated, efficient, and compassionate employees I have ever met," Rose announced, her voice ringing with conviction. "And it is a criminal failure of our management that she was ever made to feel redundant. She was the first person to show me kindness here. She, and many of you, are the heart of this company." She turned to Brenda. "So, effective immediately, I am creating a new position. Brenda is our new Director of Employee Relations, reporting directly to me. Her first task," Rose said, turning back to the crowd, "is to conduct a full review of our salary, benefits, and healthcare packages, to ensure that no one who gives their life to this company ever has to worry about their child's medical bills again." Brenda burst into tears, a raw, shocked sound of disbelief and gratitude. Rose hugged her as the entire cafeteria leaped to its feet in a standing ovation that went on for a full minute. Rose went on to announce a new 10% company-wide raise, a new investment in R&D, and a profit-sharing initiative. She wasn't liquidating the company. She was investing in it. She was honoring her father's legacy. Later that week, Rose was in her new office, the one that used to belong to the Nexus director she'd assisted. Robert Coleman stopped by, a thin leather portfolio in his hand. "The divorce is finalized, Miss Dawson," he said quietly. "Thank you, Robert." Mr. Harris's lawyers, what little was left of them, tried to contest the prenuptial agreement. They failed, spectacularly. Your father was, as in all things, meticulous. Mr. Harris signed away any and all claims to the Vanguard estate and all related assets. Robert placed a single piece of paper on her desk. He is, however, requesting alimony. Rose looked at the paper, at the desperate, baseless claim from the man who had mocked her for having a job. A small, sad smile touched her lips. She picked up a pen and signed the denied box with a firm, black signature. "Mr. Harris seems to have forgotten," she said, sliding the paper back to Robert. "I'm not sentimental, and I detest fat." Robert smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Indeed, ma'am, he signed his rights away to a simpleton. He never read the fine print." "And Mr. Harris?" she asked, not out of concern, but out of a need for final closure. "What's become of him?" From what our associates can tell, Robert said, closing his portfolio, he is struggling. He's been blacklisted by every major firm in the city. The story of what happened in your boardroom, it's become something of a legend. No one will touch him. He's living in a short-term rental in a less than desirable part of town. His suits are in hock. He's apparently been applying for entry-level analyst jobs at temp agencies. Rose nodded once. Karma. Now, Robert, let's talk about the new healthcare plan. I want it to be the best in the industry. Far across town, in a windowless, fluorescent-lit office smelling of burnt coffee and dust, a man named Greg sat staring at a spreadsheet. The cubicle walls were a depressing shade of beige. His suit was rumpled and shiny at the elbows. His face was gaunt. He was doing data entry. It was mindless, soulless, soul-crushing work. A younger man, a shift supervisor with a cheap tie and a power trip, dropped a towering stack of papers on his desk. "Hey, Greg!" the supervisor sneered, mimicking a boss. "Need you to collate these reports, and use the right staples this time. We had to redo your last batch. Then, go get me a coffee. Black. 2 sugars." Greg just stared at the wall, his hands frozen on the keyboard. He was, finally and truly, just a secretary. And so, the man who believed he was a predator learned, in the most humiliating way possible, that he was nothing more than prey. Gregory Harris's arrogance was his downfall. He was so blinded by his own reflection that he couldn't see the lioness standing right next to him. He didn't just lose his job or his marriage, he lost the entire world he had built on a foundation of lies and disdain. Rosemary Dawson, on the other hand, proved that true power isn't loud. It isn't arrogant. True power is quiet, it's observant, and it's rooted in respect. She didn't just save her company, she rebuilt it, honoring the people her husband had dismissed as fat. What do you think of this story of karma? Have you ever seen someone underestimate a quiet person only to find out they were the one in charge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you loved this story, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true-life dramatic stories every single week. We appreciate your support more than you know. The rain over New York City fell in relentless silvery sheets, blurring the skyline into a watercolor of gray and neon. From the back of a blacked-out sedan, the city's symphony was muted to a dull, percussive hum on the roof. Inside, however, a storm of a different kind was brewing, silent and devastating. Gwendolyn Astor stared through the tear-streaked window, her hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her 6-month pregnancy. Across the street, the penthouse of the Ethelgard Tower blazed with light, a beacon of opulence and betrayal. Every flicker of light, every burst of distant laughter was a fresh stab to her heart. This was her husband's 40th birthday party, a party she wasn't invited to, a party for him and for her. Life for Gwendolyn Astor had become a paradox, a beautiful prison crafted from marble glass and unspoken rules. Their Fifth Avenue triplex, a marvel of minimalist architecture curated by the world's most sought-after designers, felt less like a home and more like a museum to a life she was supposed to be living. The vast windows offered breathtaking views of Central Park, but most days they only served to show her a world that was vibrant and alive, a stark contrast to the sterile silence within her own walls. She had met Jackson Dempsey 5 years ago at a charity gala. He wasn't just wealthy, he was Dempsey Wealth, a name synonymous with global logistics and old-world power. He was charming, intelligent, and possessed a gravitational pull that was impossible to resist. He'd pursued her with a single-minded intensity that felt like a grand romance novel come to life. Gwendolen, then a promising art historian with a modest background, was swept into his orbit. Their wedding was the society event of the year, a fairy tale meticulously stage-managed by Jackson's formidable mother, Madeline Dempsey. For the first 2 years it was idyllic. They travelled, they laughed, and Jackson seemed genuinely enamored. But slowly, imperceptibly at first, the gilding on the cage began to tarnish. Jackson's work became all-consuming. The 12-hour workdays bled into 16-hour ones. Business trips, once a source of exciting reunions, became more frequent and lasted longer. The texts became shorter, the phone calls more perfunctory. He was physically present, but emotionally 1,000 miles away. Gwendolen tried to bridge the chasm. She'd wait up for him, wearing the dresses he liked, having his favourite scotch ready. But he would often walk in, loosen his tie with a sigh, give her a peck on the cheek that felt more like a duty than a desire, and retreat into his study with a mountain of paperwork. "Big merger, Gwen." He'd say the words, a familiar shield. "You understand." And she did. Or she tried to. She told herself this was the price of admission to his world. This was the sacrifice required to be the wife of a titan like Jackson Dempsey. Discovering she was pregnant had been a moment of pure, unadulterated joy for Gwendolen. She had imagined it would be the tether that would pull Jackson back to them. When she told him, he'd smiled a genuine, dazzling smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. He'd held his hand on her still flat stomach and whispered, "An heir, a Dempsey heir." The word heir had pricked at her, a subtle hint that this was more about legacy than love, but she'd pushed the thought away, clinging to the warmth of his embrace. The initial excitement soon faded back into the familiar pattern of absence. In fact, it worsened. He became more guarded with his phone, which was now perpetually silenced, and face down on his nightstand. There was the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers, clinging to his shirts when they came back from the dry cleaners, a subtle exotic fragrance of sandalwood and night-blooming jasmine. When she'd asked, he'd waved it away. Probably from a client at the firm. You know how it is, handshakes and meetings all day. The lies were clumsy, almost insulting in their simplicity. The final damning piece of evidence came a week before his 40th birthday. Jackson had told her he was arranging a quiet dinner for them at home. "Just the two of us, Gwen. And the little one," he'd said, tapping her belly. "Before things get crazy with the baby." She had been so relieved, so hopeful. The next day, while searching for a misplaced book in his study, she found an invoice tucked into a portfolio. It wasn't for a quiet dinner. It was from Elysian Events, one of the city's most exclusive party planners. The invoice detailed a lavish celebration for 200 guests at the Ethelgard Tower's private penthouse rooftop, a venue known for its hedonistic parties and stringent privacy. The event was for tonight, his birthday. The client was listed as K. Volkova. The name meant nothing to her. A quick, trembling search on the internet changed everything. Katerina Volkova. A striking, raven-haired woman described in society blogs as an art consultant and socialite. There were photos of her at various international events, often in the background of pictures featuring powerful men. And in one photo taken at Art Basel in Miami 6 months ago, a trip Jackson had supposedly taken alone, he was there standing just behind her. His eyes fixed on her with an intensity Gwendolen hadn't seen directed at herself in years. The world tilted on its axis. The quiet dinner was a lie. Her husband was celebrating his milestone birthday with another woman. The betrayal was so profound, so audacious, it left her breathless. She didn't confront him. What would be the point? He would lie, gaslight her, and call her hysterical. The Dempsey way, as she'd learned from his mother, was to handle things with cold, clean precision, not messy emotions. So she played the part of the dutiful, unsuspecting wife. This morning she'd given him his birthday gift, a vintage Patek Philippe watch she'd spent months sourcing. He had kissed her, his lips cool, and thanked her, before rushing off to a critical board meeting that couldn't be moved. Now parked in the rain-slicked street, the expensive watch was probably glinting on his wrist as he held another woman's hand. Her driver, a discreet man named Hector, who had been with her for years, sat silently in the front, his eyes fixed forward, offering her the privacy of his feigned ignorance. "Closer, Hector," Gwendolen whispered, her voice hoarse. "Pull up across the street." The car glided forward. The Ethelgard's entrance was a flurry of activity. Valets with black umbrellas rushed to shield arriving guests from the downpour. Women in glittering gowns and men in sharp tuxedos laughed as they disappeared into the golden light of the lobby. It was a world away from the silent, dark interior of her car. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, she could see silhouettes moving against the bright lights. The sound was a faint, thumping bass that vibrated through the very asphalt. She imagined the scene, the clinking of champagne flutes, the pretentious chatter, the air thick with expensive perfume and false congratulations. And then she saw them. The rooftop terrace doors slid open, and a couple stepped out into a covered alcove away from the main crowd. Even from this distance, she knew it was him. The confident set of his shoulders, the way he gestured with his hands as he spoke. And beside him, Katerina Volkova. She was even more stunning in person, a tall, statuesque figure in a crimson dress that seemed poured onto her frame. Her dark hair was slicked back, her profile sharp and aristocratic. Gwendolen's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She watched as Jackson leaned in, his expression animated and joyful in a way she ached for. He was laughing, a full-throated, genuine laugh that she hadn't heard in their silent home for what felt like an eternity. Katerina reached up and adjusted his tie. It was an intimate, familiar gesture that spoke of 1,000 other moments just like it. Then Jackson's hands went to her waist, pulling her closer. Gwendolen felt the air leave her lungs. He was going to kiss her, here in front of the whole world on his birthday. But he didn't. He did something far worse. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Gwendolen recognized it instantly. It was from Cartier. A few weeks ago, she had pointed out a stunning diamond necklace in a magazine, a piece called L'Aurore Boreale, a cascade of white and blue diamonds. She had mentioned how beautiful it was, a wistful passing comment. Jackson had smiled vaguely and said nothing. He opened the box. Even from across the street, the diamonds caught the light, exploding in a spray of fire. It was the necklace. He was giving her necklace to another woman. Katerina's gasp was visible. She threw her arms around his neck. Jackson fastened the clasp, his fingers lingering on her skin. He then tilted her chin up, and this time he did kiss her. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. It was a deep, passionate kiss, a public declaration under the glittering, indifferent New York skyline. A single hot tear escaped Gwendolen's eye, then another, until they were flowing freely, silent and scalding. Each one was a testament to a broken promise, a shattered dream. The man she had married, the father of her unborn child, was celebrating his life with someone else, adorning her with treasures meant for his wife. In the back of the silent, opulent car, surrounded by the trappings of a life she no longer recognized, Gwendolen Astor finally understood. She wasn't just in a gilded cage. The cage was empty, and she was utterly, devastatingly alone. The storm inside her finally broke, and she wept her quiet sobs lost to the sound of the rain and the distant mocking music. The drive back to the Fifth Avenue triplex was a blur of smeared city lights and suffocating silence. Each raindrop that slid down the window felt like one of her own tears. When Hector pulled up to the private entrance, he finally broke his professional silence. "Mrs. Dempsey." He said, his voice soft, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "Are you all right? Should I call someone?" His simple act of kindness was almost her undoing. She shook her head, unable to form words, and fled the car, seeking the cold, empty sanctuary of her home. The triplex, usually a symbol of Jackson's success, now felt like a mausoleum. The cavernous rooms filled with priceless art and designer furniture echoed with the hollowness of her marriage. She walked through the space, her hand trailing along the cold marble countertops and the smooth, impersonal surfaces. Every object was a reminder of him, of the life he had built, a life in which she was apparently just another beautiful, expensive acquisition. She ended up in the nursery. It was the one room she'd had complete control over. It was painted a soft, calming shade of dove grey, with a beautiful hand-painted mural of a gentle woodland scene on one wall. The custom-made crib stood in the corner, empty and waiting. A pile of impossibly small baby clothes sat folded on the changing table. This room had been her hope, her anchor. It was the future. Now it felt like a monument to her naivety. She sank into the plush rocking chair, the one she had imagined spending countless nights in humming lullabies to her child. The sight of Jackson kissing Katarina, of him placing that necklace around her throat, played on a torturous loop in her mind. It wasn't just the infidelity. It was the public nature of it, the sheer arrogance. He hadn't just cheated. He had replaced her. He was building a new life, a more exciting one, and she and their unborn child were being relegated to a quiet, inconvenient secret. The sobs she had held back in the car erupted with gut-wrenching force. It was a primal sound of pain, of a heart being systematically torn apart. She curled into a ball in the chair, her body shaking, her hands wrapped around her belly, as if to shield her baby from the poison of his father's betrayal. How could she bring a child into this, into a world built on a foundation of lies? Hours passed. The city outside quieted. The rain softened to a drizzle. Gwendolyn's tears eventually ran dry, leaving behind a cold, desolate clarity. The grief was still there, a leaden weight in her chest. But something else was beginning to stir beneath it: anger, a slow-burning, righteous fury. She had been a good wife. She had supported him, tolerated his absences, and put his needs above her own. She was carrying his child, and this was her reward, to be humiliated and discarded while he celebrated with his mistress. No. She would not be the tragic, weeping wife who faded into obscurity. She would not be a footnote in the biography of Jackson Dempsey. She was Gwendolyn Astor before she met him, and she would be Gwendolyn Astor long after he was a painful memory. The thought, small and fragile at first, began to grow. She had her own strength, her own intelligence. She had just forgotten how to use it, blinded by the dazzling light of his world. Her trembling hand reached for her phone. She scrolled past Jackson's name, past his mother's, past all the society contacts that were his, not hers. Her finger hovered over a single name: Beatrice Chen. Beatrice, or Bea, as she insisted, had been Gwendolyn's best friend since their post-grad days at Columbia. While Gwendolyn had pursued art history, Bea had gone to law school, emerging as a razor-sharp, take-no-prisoners litigator at one of the city's top firms. She had been wary of Jackson from the start, her perceptive eyes seeing the steel beneath his charm. "He collects beautiful things, Gwen." Bea had warned her gently before the wedding. "Just make sure you're not one of them." Gwendolen hadn't listened. Now Bee's words echoed in the silent nursery with prophetic clarity. She pressed the call button. It was well after 2 a.m., but she knew Bee would answer. "Gwen!" Bee's voice was instantly alert, cutting through the fog of sleep. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" "The baby's fine." Gwendolen choked out her voice, a raw whisper. "It's Jackson." And then it all came pouring out. The late nights, the suspicious perfume, the secret party, the Ethelgard tower, the crimson dress, the other woman, and the necklace. She recounted every soul-crushing detail, her voice breaking with each new confession of his betrayal. Bee listened without interruption. There was no, "I told you so," no judgment, just a focused silence on the other end of the line. When Gwendolen finally finished her story, hanging in the air like toxic smoke, Bee's response was not one of sympathy, but of strategy. "Okay," Bee said, her voice devoid of emotion, replaced by the calm, lethal precision of a lawyer preparing for battle. "First things first, do not confront him. Do not text him. Do not call him. When he comes home, you are asleep. If he wakes you, you have a headache. You are polite, you are distant, but you are not accusatory. Do you understand? We give him nothing. But Bee, no buts. Gwen, you are no longer his wife. You are now an opposing party in a negotiation. From this moment on, every word, every action is calculated. Did you take any pictures tonight?" "Pictures, no, I was just sitting there." "Okay, doesn't matter. We can get street camera footage, security logs. Did he use a credit card you have access to for the party planner, or the necklace?" "The invoice I found was for Kay Volkova. He's probably funding her through a shell account. He's not stupid." Gwendolen said, a bitter taste in her mouth. "No," Bea agreed. "He's not stupid. He's arrogant, and arrogance leaves a trail. Now I want you to do two things. First, try to get some sleep. You need to be clear-headed. Second, meet me tomorrow morning. 10 a.m., my office. Not our usual brunch spot. This is business now." "What are we going to do?" Gwendolen asked the question, sounding small and helpless. Bee's voice dropped, taking on an edge of hard steel that sent a shiver down Gwendolen's spine. "What are we going to do? We are going to protect you and that baby. We are going to methodically and quietly gather every single piece of leverage we can find. We are not just going to divorce him, Gwen. We are going to dismantle him." Hanging up the phone, Gwendolen felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: power. It was a terrifying, unfamiliar sensation. The path forward would be ugly and painful, but for the first time, it was a path of her own choosing. She stood up and walked over to the nursery window, looking out at the waking city. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale grey light over the park. It was a new day. Jackson would come home soon, smelling of champagne, and another woman expecting to find his docile pregnant wife sleeping peacefully. He would find her, but she would not be the same woman he had left yesterday. The shattering was over. Now it was time to pick up the pieces, not to rebuild what she had, but to forge them into a weapon. Beatrice Chen's office was on the 54th floor of a skyscraper in the financial district, a world of polished chrome, smoked glass, and hushed, intimidating efficiency. It was a place where fortunes were made, and empires were brought to their knees through carefully worded clauses and brutal litigation. It was the perfect war room. When Gwendolen arrived, Bea was waiting with 2 cups of black coffee and a plate of pastries that neither of them would touch. Bea looked impeccable, in a sharp navy blue power suit, her demeanor radiating a competence that was immensely calming. "First," Bea said, sliding a folder across the vast mahogany desk, We need to understand what we're up against. She tapped the folder. The Dempsey Holdings prenuptial agreement. I went over the copy you sent me last night. It's ironclad as expected. It protects all his premarital assets' inheritance and any growth from those assets. It's designed to give you a comfortable but controlled exit, a one-time settlement and alimony for a few years. It's generous by normal standards, but for a man of his wealth, it's pocket change. It's an insult. I signed it, Gwendolen said quietly. I didn't want him to think I was after his money. Of course you did, Bea said, her tone softening for a moment. You were in love. They count on that. But there's a morality clause, Article 11, Section B. It voids certain restrictive terms of the settlement in the event of proven marital misconduct leading to public scandal or emotional distress. It's our crowbar. We just need a wall to jam it into. Bea leaned forward, her expression intense. He thinks you're a piece of art he acquired. Beautiful, quiet, and valuable, but ultimately an object. We need to change his perception. To do that, we need information. Not just about the affair, but about everything. She slid a business card across the desk. It was plain white with a single name and number. Frank Miller, private investigator. He's old-school, discreet and relentless. He looks like he walked out of a 1940s detective novel, but he can find a hidden bank account faster than a truffle pig. He's the best. And he's expensive. I don't care, Gwendolen said, her voice firm. Whatever it costs. The meeting with Frank Miller took place in a dusty, cluttered office in a less glamorous part of town. The man himself was exactly as Bea had described, late 50s, with a crumpled trench coat, a weary face, and eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Gwendolen's story, patiently taking notes in a small, spiral-bound notebook. He asked few questions, but they were sharp and to the point. The girlfriend's name is Katerina Volkova. He asked, his voice a low grumble. Yes, she's listed as an art consultant. Right, that's a popular euphemism, Frank said dryly. And the party was at the Ethelgard. Good. Their security is tight, but their staff is underpaid. I'll start there. I'll also start a full financial workup on Mr. Dempsey. We're looking for accounts, shell corporations, credit cards, anything that isn't on the official books you'd see. And I'll do a deep dive on Ms. Volkova. You'd be surprised what people leave behind on the internet, even when they try to scrub it. For the next 3 weeks, Gwendolen lived a strange double life. To Jackson she was quiet and withdrawn, which she explained away as pregnancy-related fatigue and hormones. He seemed to barely notice, wrapped up in his own world. He was often gone before she woke up and came home, long after she'd gone to bed. The charade was exhausting, but every polite smile, every feigned inquiry about his day was a strategic move, lulling him into a false sense of security. Meanwhile, Frank Miller's reports started coming in. They arrived in plain manila envelopes delivered by courier to Bea's office. Each one was a small explosion in her carefully constructed reality. The first report confirmed the party. Frank had convinced a catering staff member to provide a sworn affidavit. It detailed the event Jackson Dempsey's 40th birthday, hosted and paid for by Katerina Volkova. Jackson was the guest of honor, and his toast to Katerina was described as incredibly intimate, thanking her for bringing color back into his life. The report included blurry cell phone pictures of them kissing of him, feeding her cake of them dancing. It was sordid and damning. The second report was financial. Frank, with the help of a forensic accountant, had unearthed a labyrinth. Jackson was a master at hiding money. There was a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, Argent Stream Holdings, which owned another shell in Delaware, which in turn was used to lease the lavish apartment where Katerina Volkova lived. The same corporation funded a credit card with no spending limit, the one she had used to pay for the party, and Frank confirmed the Cartier necklace. It was a clear, undeniable trail of marital assets being funneled to his mistress. But it was the third report, the one on Katerina Volkova, that changed the game. "This is interesting," Frank had said over a secure phone line. "On the surface, she's clean. Born in St. Petersburg, moved to London for school, then to New York, built a career as a consultant. But her digital footprint is suspiciously sterile. It's too perfect. People have messy pasts, old social media accounts they forget about, embarrassing photos. She has none of that. It's like she was born 10 years ago." Frank had kept digging. He'd gone beyond digital records, pulling international archives, and he found it. Katerina Volkova didn't exist before 2013. Her real name was Anya Petrova. The Petrova family had once been prominent in Russian industrial circles, owning a mid-sized but highly profitable shipping company. Gwendolyn's blood ran cold as she read the next part. In the early 2000s, Dempsey Logistics, under the aggressive leadership of Jackson's father, had orchestrated a hostile takeover of several smaller European competitors. One of them was the Petrovas Company. The takeover was brutal and legally dubious. The Petrovas were ruined financially and socially. Anya's father, disgraced and bankrupt, had taken his own life a year later. Anya, then just a teenager, had disappeared with her mother. She changed her name. She reinvented herself. Gwendolyn breathed, staring at the report in B's office. She didn't just reinvent herself. "Gwen," B said, her eyes wide with the implications. "This isn't a simple affair. This isn't a gold digger looking for a benefactor. This is a long con. This is revenge." The pieces clicked into place with terrifying speed. Katerina's meticulous perfection, her targeting of Jackson, the way she had isolated him. She wasn't after his money in the traditional sense. She was positioning herself inside his life, making herself indispensable, likely gaining his trust, perhaps even access to his business secrets. The affair wasn't the goal, it was the weapon. Suddenly the narrative shifted. Jackson wasn't just an adulterer, he was a fool, a powerful, arrogant man being played by a woman whose life his family had destroyed. A new, dangerous idea began to form in Gwendolyn's mind. She had been gathering ammunition for a divorce settlement. But this was something else, entirely. This was a different kind of leverage. "Frank found one more thing," B said, pulling out a final sheet of paper. It was a printout of a wire transfer confirmation. "Argent Stream Holdings Jackson's secret slush fund made a transfer 2 days ago, $250,000. To Katerina?" Gwendolyn asked. "No," B said, her voice grim. "It was to a man named Declan Monroe." Gwendolyn gasped. Declan Monroe was not just some random name. He was Jackson's fiercest business rival, the CEO of Monroe Atlantic, a competitor who had been chipping away at Dempsey Logistics' market share for years. They hated each other with a vitriol that was legendary in their industry. The betrayal was now a 3-dimensional chess game. Katerina wasn't just seeking personal revenge. She was actively working with Jackson's arch-nemesis. She was feeding information to Monroe, funded by Jackson's own hidden money. This wasn't just marital misconduct anymore. This was corporate espionage. This could ruin him. Gwendolyn looked down at the pile of folders on the desk. The photos, the bank statements, the history of a ruined family. She had started this journey seeking justice for a broken heart. Now she held the key to the potential destruction of the entire Dempsey empire. The question was no longer how she would leave her husband, but how much of his world she would leave intact. The air in the triplex was thick with an unspoken tension. For a week, Gwendolen had carried her terrible knowledge like a physical weight, moving through her days with a serene, almost chilling calm. She was no longer the grieving wife. She was a general on the eve of a decisive battle. Jackson, oblivious, interpreted her quietude as acceptance, perhaps even a melancholy resignation to the state of their marriage. He was, as Bea predicted, too arrogant to imagine any other possibility. The confrontation was scheduled with the same precision as a corporate merger. Gwendolen chose her moment carefully. It was a Sunday evening. Jackson was home, a rare occurrence. He was in his study, a cavernous room, lined with dark wood and leather-bound books, nursing a glass of scotch and reviewing market reports. Gwendolen walked in without knocking. She was wearing a simple cream-colored cashmere dress that accentuated her pregnancy, a deliberate choice. She wanted him to see everything he was throwing away. She placed a single unmarked manila folder on the polished surface of his antique desk. He looked up, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Gwen, I'm a bit busy here." "I'm sure you are," she said, her voice even and steady. "But you need to see this." He sighed, the sound of a man tolerating an interruption, and casually flipped open the folder. The first thing he saw was a photograph, a high-resolution image taken with a long lens camera. It was of him and Katarina on the terrace of her apartment, locked in a passionate embrace. It was clearly not from the night of his party. It was from 2 days ago. Jackson's face paled. He slammed the folder shut. "What is this? Are you having me followed? Gwendolen, this is..." "Beneath me," she finished for him, a cold smile touching her lips. "I agree. But desperation calls for rather undignified measures, wouldn't you say?" He stood up, his posture shifting from relaxed confidence to defensive anger. "This is a private matter. It's complicated." "No, it's not," Gwendolen said, her voice never rising. She placed a second folder on the desk. "This, for example, is not complicated at all." He opened it. Inside were the incorporating documents for Argent Stream Holdings in the Cayman Islands. Next to them were bank statements showing millions of dollars flowing through the account, and then a copy of the lease for a penthouse apartment at the Olympic Tower. Lessee Argent Stream Holdings. Authorized occupant Katarina Volkova. Jackson stared at the papers, his jaw tight. The blood had drained from his face. "Where did you get this? You're a public figure, Jackson. Your life is a matter of public record if you know where to look. And I hired someone who knows exactly where to look." She let that sink in before placing the third and final folder on the desk. "This one I think will be of particular interest to you." He hesitated, his hand hovering over the folder, as if he knew it contained something far more venomous than the previous two. He finally opened it. The first page was a black and white photo of a family, a man, a woman, and a teenage girl with dark, piercing eyes. Underneath it was a name, the Petrova family. The subsequent pages detailed the hostile takeover of Petrova Shipping by Dempsey Logistics in 2002. It included newspaper clippings about the company's bankruptcy and a short, stark article on the suicide of Andrei Petrova. The final page was a document showing a legal name change, Anya Petrova to Katarina Volkova. Jackson sank back into his chair, his billion-dollar empire and carefully constructed world crumbling around him. He looked at Gwendolen, and for the first time, she saw not arrogance or anger, but a sliver of genuine fear. Her father," he stammered. "Yes," Gwendolen said softly. "She doesn't love you, Jackson. She hates you. She hates your family. You weren't a lover to her. You were a project, a means to an end. Every whisper, every touch, every night you spent with her was an act of revenge for what your father did to hers." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the city outside. Jackson looked like a man who had been stabbed the wound, invisible but mortal. His affair wasn't a passionate indiscretion. It was a symptom of his own monumental foolishness. He had been played expertly and ruthlessly. Before he could respond, the study doors opened. Madeleine Dempsey stood there, her presence as cold and imposing as ever. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored Chanel suit, her silver hair styled in its usual immaculate coif. Her sharp eyes took in the scene, her son pale and defeated, her daughter-in-law pregnant and radiating an unnerving strength, the open folders on the desk. "I was just leaving," Madeleine said, her voice like chipping ice, though it was clear she had just arrived and likely been listening from the hall. "But it seems there's a family matter to attend to." She walked to the desk, her gaze sweeping over the documents. She showed no surprise, no shock. Her expression was one of grim, calculated assessment, like a CEO reviewing a disastrous quarterly report. She looked at Jackson with undisguised contempt. "I warned you about her. I had her vetted. The background was too polished. You in your infinite wisdom told me it was none of my business." She then turned her gaze to Gwendolen. It was not a warm look, but there was a flicker of something new in it, respect. The kind of respect one predator affords another. "And you," Madeleine said. "You've been busy." "I've been protecting myself," Gwendolen replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. "And my child." Madeleine picked up the folder on Katerina. "This is a significant problem, a vendetta. It compromises you, Jackson. It compromises the company." "I'll handle it," Jackson mumbled, running a hand through his hair. "I'll cut her off." "It's too late for that," Gwendolen said, her voice cutting through his pathetic attempt to regain control. She slid one final piece of paper out from her sleeve. It was the wire transfer confirmation. "She's not just getting revenge, Jackson. She's getting paid for it." She pushed the paper towards him. He stared at the names. Argent Stream Holdings, Declan Monroe, $250,000. The implication hit him like a physical blow. He actually recoiled in his chair. This was no longer a personal betrayal. This was treason. He had been sleeping with a corporate spy, funded her with his own money, and she was funneling information to his greatest enemy. He hadn't just been unfaithful to his wife. He had been unfaithful to his legacy, to the Dempsey name itself. Madeleine snatched the paper, her eyes narrowing as she read it. The mask of icy composure finally cracked, revealing a flash of pure fury. She looked at her son as if he were a complete and utter stranger, a liability that needed to be managed. "You fool!" She whispered the words, carrying more venom than a shout. "You catastrophic fool." The power in the room had shifted entirely. It no longer belonged to Jackson, the billionaire titan, or even Madeleine, the matriarch. It rested in the hands of the pregnant, silent woman they had both so grievously underestimated. Gwendolen stood there, a quiet vessel of their destruction, holding all the cards. She hadn't screamed, she hadn't cried, she hadn't made a scene. She had simply presented the truth, and the truth was more devastating than any emotional outburst could ever be. The war was over before they even knew they were fighting it. The immediate aftermath of the revelation was a study in controlled chaos. Madeleine Dempsey, recovering from her momentary shock, took command with the ruthless efficiency of a field marshal. Her first act was to dismiss her son from his own study with a contemptuous wave of her hand. "Go upstairs, Jackson. Pour yourself a drink. Do not speak to anyone. Do not touch your phone. Try for once in your life to do nothing." Jackson, looking hollowed out and years older, obeyed without a word, a deposed king shuffling away from his throne. When he was gone, Madeleine turned to Gwendolen. The room, which had felt charged with explosive energy, became intensely quiet. It was just the two of them, the matriarch and the heiress, apparent two women on opposite sides of a chasm of betrayal. "You have been far more resourceful than I gave you credit for," Madeleine began, her voice a low, clinical monotone. She gestured to the folders. "You've done your homework. So what is it you want? A bigger settlement. Public humiliation, blood. What I want." Gwendolen said, her voice level, "is a future for my child. A future that is stable and secure and free from the toxicity and lies of this family." "A noble sentiment," Madeleine said with a dismissive air. "But we live in a practical world. This information in the wrong hands. Declan Monroe could use this to trigger a shareholder revolt. The corporate espionage charge alone could lead to a federal investigation. This goes far beyond a messy divorce." She paused, her eyes locking onto Gwendolen's. "You hold a gun to the head of this entire company. So I ask you again, what is your price?" Gwendolen had rehearsed this moment with Bea for hours. She knew her lines. She knew her demands. But looking at this cold, calculating woman, she felt a sudden, powerful impulse to go off script. The game was more complex than she'd realized. "Before we discuss my price," Gwendolen said, walking slowly towards the vast window overlooking the park, "I think there's something you're missing. You think Katerina Anya Petrova is simply working for Declan Monroe. That this is a straightforward case of corporate espionage for money and revenge." Madeleine raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And you believe there's more?" "I know there is," Gwendolen said, turning back to face her. "Frank Miller, my investigator, he kept digging. He's a very thorough man. He found it odd that Declan Monroe, a man known for his meticulous planning, would use someone as emotionally compromised as Anya. A revenge mission is unpredictable. Monroe doesn't like unpredictable variables." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. So Frank looked into the connection between them, and he found a third party, a broker, someone who connected Anya to Monroe, who helped facilitate the entire arrangement. A flicker of unease crossed Madeleine's face. This was new information. This was a piece she didn't have. "Who?" Gwendolen walked back to the desk. She reached into a clutch which she had placed on a nearby chair and pulled out another much thinner file. She opened it and took out a single sheet of paper. It was a photograph. It showed two people sitting at a small, discreet cafe in Guinevere. One was Declan Monroe. The other was a man Gwendolen didn't recognize at first. He was older, distinguished, with a familiar air of quiet authority. Frank had to pull a lot of strings to get this. Gwendolen said, her voice barely a whisper. Taken 3 years ago, long before Jackson even met Katerina. She slid the photo across the desk to Madeleine. Madeleine picked it up. She stared at it, her face slowly losing all its color. Her manicured hand began to tremble ever so slightly. Gwendolen delivered the final devastating blow. "You know who that is, don't you? It's Lawrence Croft, your head of European acquisitions for 20 years, your husband's most trusted lieutenant, the man who orchestrated the Petrova takeover for your family back in 2002. Madeleine looked up, her eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. It was Croft who found Anya Petrova. Gwendolen continued pressing her advantage. It was Croft who knew her history, her potential as a weapon. And it was Croft, your loyal man, who brokered the deal to deliver her to Declan Monroe. And do you know why? Because 5 years ago, when your husband passed away, Jackson decided Croft was part of the old guard. He forced him into early retirement, humiliated him, threw away 20 years of loyalty without a second thought. The carefully constructed world of Madeleine Dempsey shattered. The betrayal was not external. It was internal. The enemy was not just at the gates. He had been inside the castle walls for decades. This wasn't just Jackson's affair. This wasn't just Anya's revenge or Declan's corporate raiding. This was a rot that started within their own organization, a ghost of their own past business practices, coming back to haunt them, orchestrated by one of their own. Katerina wasn't the mastermind. Declan Munro wasn't the sole instigator. They were both pieces in a much larger game of revenge, one initiated by a man the Dempseys themselves had created and then discarded. "My God," Madeline whispered, sinking into the chair Jackson had just vacated. For the first time, Gwendolyn saw her not as a powerful matriarch, but as an old woman surveying the ruins of her legacy. The sins of the father, the sins of the son, and the sins of their most loyal servant had all converged into this single catastrophic moment. "So you see, Madeline," Gwendolyn said, her voice now filled with an icy finality, "this is far bigger than you imagined. Declan Munro has an insider's roadmap to your company's weaknesses provided by your own former executive. He has a weapon in your son's bed. And she tapped the folders on the desk, have the proof of all of it." She let the full weight of the situation settle upon the older woman. "We are no longer negotiating the terms of a divorce settlement. We are negotiating the survival of Dempsey Logistics, and I am now your most important business partner." The twist wasn't just that the mistress was a spy. The twist was that the entire conspiracy was an inside job, a blowback from the Dempseys' own ruthless history. Gwendolyn had thought she was holding a gun. She now realized she was holding the detonator to a bomb that had been planted under the Dempsey Empire years ago, and she was the only one who could decide whether or not to push the button. In the days that followed, the Fifth Avenue triplex became a corporate crisis center, disguised as a luxury home. Madeline, stripped of her arrogance and galvanized by the threat to her family's legacy, worked with a terrifying focus. Jackson was a ghost in his own house, sidelined, and broken, his authority completely usurped by his mother and the wife he had betrayed. He was made to understand in no uncertain terms by Madeline that his only role was to remain silent and do exactly as he was told. The negotiations did not take place over a boardroom table, but in the sterile, art-filled living room. It was Gwendolyn with B. Chen at her side against Madeline and a team of the most ruthless lawyers in New York. "Let's be clear about the terms," B started, her voice cutting through the tension. "Gwendolyn is not interested in a hostile takeover or a public scandal. A scandal hurts the company's stock, which in turn hurts the value of her child's future inheritance. We are all, for better or worse, invested in the continued stability of Dempsey Logistics." Madeline nodded, a flicker of appreciation in her eyes. This was language she understood. "Therefore," B continued, "the evidence my client has gathered regarding the affair, the corporate espionage, and Mr. Croft's involvement will be placed in a secure, encrypted digital vault. The access keys will be held in escrow, to be released only under specific conditions." "What conditions?" Madeline asked, her voice tight. Gwendolyn spoke for the first time, her gaze fixed on Madeline. "First, Jackson will step down as CEO, effective immediately. He can retain his seat on the board and his shares. But his operational control is over. The board will be told it's for personal health reasons. You, Madeline, will resume the role of interim CEO until a suitable replacement is found. Your son is a liability. He has proven that." Jackson, sitting on a couch across the room, flinched as if struck but said nothing. His mother didn't even look at him. She just gave a curt nod. "Done. Second." Gwendolyn went on. "The prenuptial agreement is void. It will be replaced by a new post-nuptial agreement. I will not be taking a lump sum payout. Instead, a trust will be established for our child. A trust that cannot be altered or accessed by anyone but a neutral third-party trustee until the child is 25. Into that trust, Jackson will place 20% of his personal shares in Dempsey Logistics, not their cash value, the shares themselves. My child's future will be tied directly to the future of this company. One of Madeline's lawyers started to protest, but she silenced him with a glance. 20% was an immense fortune, a significant portion of Jackson's personal holdings. But it was a brilliant move. It ensured Gwendolyn's silence by making her child one of the largest individual shareholders. Their interests were now permanently aligned. Agreed. Madeline said the word, tasting like ash. Third. Gwendolyn said, her voice softening slightly. I want the house, this apartment. The title will be transferred to my name, free and clear. I will raise my child here. It's the only home he or she will have ever known, and I won't have their life disrupted because of their father's mistakes. This, for some reason, seemed to hit Madeline the hardest. The triplex was the family's crown jewel. But she knew she had no choice. She nodded again. Finally, Gwendolyn said, standing up. I want him gone. Jackson will move out. He can see his child, but by appointment, and not in this home for the first year. There will be no divorce filed. We will remain legally married. A public divorce now on the heels of his health-related departure would raise too many questions. We will be separated quietly and permanently. For the sake of the company, we will maintain the illusion of a family. For the sake of my sanity, he will not be a part of my life. The terms were brutal, but surgically precise. She wasn't destroying the family. She was seizing control of it. She was exiling her husband from his own life, taking his home a significant portion of his wealth for their child, and effectively ending his career. She was doing it all without a single headline in the gossip columns. As for the external threats, Madeline handled them with the cold precision she was known for. Lawrence Croft was visited by Madeline's lawyers. Presented with the evidence against him, the disgraced executive disappeared. His severance package revoked his reputation intact, but his power utterly neutralized. Katerina Volkova, or Anya Petrova, received a similar unannounced visit. She was shown the files detailing her real identity and her conspiracy. She was offered a simple choice: disappear forever, with a one-way ticket back to Europe, and a small untraceable settlement to ensure she never returned or faced charges of fraud and corporate espionage that would land her in a federal prison. She chose the ticket. Her revenge, so meticulously planned, had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, ignominious retreat. Declan Munro found his source of information suddenly dry up. Without the insider intelligence from Croft and Katerina, his strategic advantage vanished. He would never know how close he came to toppling the Dempsey giant. 2 months later, Gwendolyn gave birth to a healthy baby boy whom she named Spencer. Spencer Astor Dempsey. He had his father's eyes, but Gwendolyn was determined he would have his mother's strength. The final scene of the drama took place not in the tense living room, but in the quiet nursery. Gwendolyn was rocking Spencer, humming a soft lullaby. Jackson stood in the doorway, a stranger in the home he once owned. He had come for one of his scheduled supervised visits. He looked diminished, a man hollowed out by his own failures. "He's beautiful, Gwen," Jackson whispered. "Yes, he is," she replied, not looking at him. I'm sorry." He said the words sounding inadequate, pathetic. "For everything." Gwendolyn finally looked up at him, her expression not of anger or hate, but of a profound and weary pity. "Don't be sorry, Jackson. Just be better. For him." She turned her attention back to her son. the center of her new world. Jackson stood in the doorway for a long moment, an exile looking in at the life he had forfeited. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the long, empty hall. Gwendolen Astor had walked into this marriage as a naive art historian and had been treated like a decorative object. She now sat as the undisputed queen of her own domain, the guardian of a significant fortune, and the mother of the future of the Dempsey legacy. She had not set out to win a war only to survive a betrayal, but in doing so, she had learned the language of power and had rewritten the rules of the gilded cage, transforming it from a prison into a fortress. Her son would grow up not knowing the sordid details of his parents' story, but he would be raised by a woman who had faced down an empire and emerged not just intact, but in control. So what begins as a story of heartbreaking betrayal transforms into an incredible saga of resilience and empowerment. Gwendolen's journey from a weeping wife outside a skyscraper to the quiet, unassailable power within it serves as a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about the absence of pain, but about what we choose to build from the wreckage. She didn't just get even. She got everything, but on her own terms, securing a future for the one innocent person in the entire affair, her child. Her story shows that sometimes the most devastating blows can reveal a strength we never knew we had. If Gwendolen's incredible story of transformation and strategic victory moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who appreciates a story of strength, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.